You have sacramentals in your home, holy water, crucifixes, medals, sacred objects placed carefully, maybe by your parents, maybe by you. They hang on your walls, sit quietly on shelves, or rest in drawers next to family heirlooms. But I need to ask you something that almost no one ever dares to ask. Are these sacramentals truly protecting you? Or have they become nothing more than decorations you pass by without a second thought? It's a question that cuts deep, because for many Catholics, sacramentals are seen as automatic shields. Hang a crucifix in the living room, place a bottle of holy water by the door, and your home is protected. That's what we were told. That's what we believed. But what if that belief is only half the truth? What if, by treating sacramentals this way, we've stripped them of their real power? This is a difficult truth to confront, but it's one we can't ignore. Sacramentals are not magical charms. They hold no power if they are treated like lucky objects, passively sitting there while we live our lives disconnected from prayer, from understanding, from faith itself. And this is exactly why so many Catholic homes, despite being filled with religious items, remain vulnerable to spiritual attack. Padre Pio understood this better than anyone. His life was not spent in quiet devotion. It was spent in battle. Night after night, demons didn't just haunt him, they attacked him physically, violently. Yet despite that relentless assault, they could never truly defeat him. Why? Because Padre Pio didn't just own sacramentals, he knew how to wield them. His holy water was never just a bottle of water. His crucifix was never just a decoration. His medals were never just accessories. Each one became an active extension of his faith, a weapon sharpened through prayer and understanding. And today you need to hear what Padre Pio knew, because this might be the message that changes everything for your family. I'm going to share with you the 7 essential sacramentals every Catholic home must have. But more importantly, I'm going to show you how to use them the way Padre Pio did. Because here's the uncomfortable truth no one talks about. Most Catholics make a critical mistake with sacramentals. A mistake so common, so subtle, that they don't even know they're making it. And that one mistake could be the reason why your home, despite being covered in religious symbols, still feels heavy, tense, and spiritually exposed. If you've ever thought to yourself, I have holy objects everywhere, but my family still argues, my sleep is restless, and my heart feels uneasy, this message is for you. Because the truth is, sacramentals only work when combined with faith, intention, and understanding. They are physical channels of grace, but grace flows through knowledge and belief. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to learn could be the missing piece your home and your soul has been searching for. Before we go any further, I need you to take part in this divine work. If your heart feels the weight of this message, if you sense that this truth is exactly what your home has been needing, pause for a moment right now, subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment below saying, "My home is covered by grace." These simple acts aren't just clicks, they are declarations. When you engage, you help this message reach homes that are silently crying out for protection. You become part of a spiritual chain, spreading divine light to families who may not even realize they're under attack. And finally, share this video with someone you love, because the shield of grace grows stronger when we stand together. We are living in a time of quiet spiritual warfare. The attacks are no longer loud and obvious. Evil doesn't need to knock furniture over or appear in terrifying visions. It slips in through anxiety, depression, constant arguments, and that strange heaviness you feel in the air when you wake up tired, even after 8 hours of sleep. Spiritual darkness has become subtle, sophisticated, and it's targeting families directly. That's why understanding Padre Pio's approach to sacramentals isn't just helpful, it's essential. His wisdom wasn't theoretical, it was forged in battle, tested through suffering, and confirmed through victory. What he discovered can transform your home from spiritually vulnerable to divinely protected, but only if you understand the true purpose and proper use of each sacramental. Here's the first misunderstanding we need to clear up. Sacramentals are not sacraments. That distinction matters more than most Catholics realize. Sacraments, like baptism and the Eucharist, were instituted directly by Christ to transform our souls. Sacramentals were given to us by the Church to protect and sanctify the physical and spiritual space around us. They don't change your soul the way sacraments do, but they do create an environment where grace flows more easily into your life. Padre Pio often described sacramentals as an invisible shield, but that shield isn't automatic. Just owning them doesn't activate it. It's like installing a security system and never turning it on. The equipment is there, but the protection is not. Sacramentals only become powerful when you actively use them with understanding and faith. They work in harmony with your spiritual life, not as a replacement for prayer, confession, or receiving the Eucharist, but as reinforcements that strengthen your home's spiritual defenses. And here's something else most people miss. Sacramentals work best when they are layered, used together to form a complete spiritual armor. One crucifix in the hallway is good. A crucifix in every room, combined with holy water at every entrance, a rosary prayed daily, and blessed medals placed strategically. That's when your home begins to transform into a fortress. Padre Pio's first and most essential sacramental was holy water. After the sacraments themselves, holy water was his go-to weapon, because he literally saw, what it could do. During some of his darkest nights, when demonic attacks turned physical, holy water was the first thing he reached for. Not as a superstition, but as a weapon. It worked because he understood its purpose. Most Catholics keep holy water in one place, by the front door, or in a small bottle somewhere in the kitchen. Padre Pio taught something radically different. Holy water should flow through your home, touching every room, every corner, every doorway. It's not something you use occasionally, it's something you use daily with intention. Padre Pio taught that the first action of your day should be blessing yourself with holy water, before your feet touch the floor, before coffee, before checking your phone. Stand before a crucifix, dip your fingers in holy water, make the sign of the cross, and pray for protection. This is what Padre Pio called the morning seal, a spiritual shield placed over you before you even step out into the world. Holy water isn't passive, it's meant to be wielded. When tension rises, when you feel a darkness settling into your home, when arguments erupt for no reason, take the holy water and walk your home. Bless every room, sprinkle every corner, pray out loud if you can. And as you do, remember this: holy water isn't magic, but when combined with faith and prayer, it becomes a conduit of divine power. Padre Pio even had a prayer he would teach his spiritual children to say as they sprinkled holy water: "By this holy water and by your precious blood, O Lord, wash away all sin and seal this home in your protection." Simple words, but when spoken with faith, they activate something most Catholics have never experienced: a home infused with grace, protected not by superstition, but by the living presence of God flowing through sacramentals used with intention and understanding. This is just the beginning. There are 6 more sacramentals Padre Pio taught his spiritual children to use, and each one builds upon the last. Together they form an unbreakable shield, but only if you know how to use them. Stay with me, because what comes next could change the way you protect your family forever. Holy water was always within reach for Padre Pio, not because of superstition, but because he understood what most people overlook. Holy water is not just blessed water. It is a living reminder of baptism, a physical connection to the moment grace first entered your soul. But like every sacramental, its power depends on how it's used. Padre Pio knew this water could cleanse more than dust and dirt. It could cleanse spiritual residue, the unseen heaviness that clings to homes after arguments, grief, or fear settle into the walls. He taught his spiritual children to place small fonts of holy water by every door, and to dip their fingers and cross themselves every time they entered or left a room. This was not a ritual for show, it was a declaration, a spiritual boundary drawn again and again, reminding both the family and the unseen world who truly ruled that home. He instructed families to walk their homes with holy water whenever they felt heaviness, praying aloud and blessing each corner. These acts, simple yet deliberate, turned holy water into something far greater than a symbol. It became a sword. But holy water was only the beginning. After holy water, Padre Pio placed the crucifix at the center of every Catholic home's spiritual defense. Not just one, but a crucifix in every room, visible, blessed, and honored. Most homes have at least one crucifix, but how many of those crucifixes have become nothing more than silent decorations? Padre Pio warned his spiritual children about this mistake. A crucifix without faith is no more powerful than a piece of wood. Its power is unlocked through reverence, through prayer, through remembering what it represents. Padre Pio's crucifix was never out of reach during his most intense spiritual battles. When demonic attacks came, he would hold his crucifix tightly, pressing it against his heart or forehead. He knew the crucifix was not just a symbol of Christ's suffering. It was a declaration of victory. The moment of Christ's death was the moment evil lost its ultimate hold. That's what the crucifix proclaims to every spirit that sees it. The battle has already been won. He taught his followers to begin and end each day standing before the crucifix, making the sign of the cross while gazing upon it, remembering the power it holds. In times of family discord, he instructed them to gather before the crucifix, pray together, and invite Christ's presence into the room. This wasn't superstition. It was spiritual alignment, placing Christ's victory between every argument, every fear, and every spirit trying to sow division within the home. He also told them to touch and kiss the crucifix regularly, not out of habit, but with intention, to reaffirm their trust in the cross, to anchor their faith to the moment evil was disarmed. Padre Pio believed the crucifix had to become a living presence in the home, not a relic hanging silently on the wall. Its presence, when honored correctly, created what he called a point of grace, a place where heaven's authority touched the earth. But the crucifix alone was not enough. Padre Pio believed that in every home, the rosary had to hang near every crucifix, a reminder that no home stands unguarded when held within Our Lady's protection. For Padre Pio, the rosary wasn't just a devotional prayer, it was a weapon. He called it his weapon of choice in spiritual warfare. And just like holy water and the crucifix, its power depended on how it was used. Padre Pio taught that the rosary should never be out of reach. He often fell asleep with it in his hands and woke up still holding it, as though it had been guarding him through the night. He instructed families to not only keep rosaries in the home, but to pray them aloud together, daily if possible. Even if the entire family couldn't participate, the rhythm of the daily rosary built what Padre Pio called a fortress of faith. Every prayer linked together, adding another layer to the invisible shield protecting the home. But there was a deeper teaching most people missed. Praying the rosary mechanically was not enough. Padre Pio insisted that his spiritual children meditate on the mysteries with full attention. As each bead passed through their fingers, they were to enter into the scene, feel the cold night of Gethsemane, stand at the foot of the cross, rejoice at the empty tomb. This wasn't just prayer, it was immersion. And immersion brought power. He also revealed a powerful secret, combining the rosary with holy water. As families prayed, they were to walk through the home, sprinkling holy water, pausing before each crucifix to pray aloud. This layering of sacramentals didn't just add protection, it multiplied it. Each sacramental activated the next, creating what he described as a triple shield: the cleansing of holy water, the authority of the crucifix, and the maternal protection of Our Lady's prayer. But Padre Pio didn't stop there. Alongside these primary sacramentals, he placed special importance on sacred medals, particularly the St. Benedict medal and the Miraculous medal. These were not jewelry to him. They were shields, each carrying specific spiritual authority. The St. Benedict medal bore the ancient prayers of exorcism within its very design. Every letter, every line was a rebuke to the enemy. But Padre Pio warned, wearing the medal wasn't enough. Its power depended on understanding and belief in the prayers it carried. He advised families to place St. Benedict medals at every entrance. Doors, windows, even buried at the corners of the property if possible. These medals marked territory, declaring the home consecrated ground, defended by heaven's authority. But they had to be properly blessed by a priest using the traditional Benedictine exorcism blessing, not a generic blessing, but one infused with the ancient words specifically crafted to repel evil. The miraculous medal held a different kind of power, a maternal covering. Given by Our Lady herself, it carried promises of protection to all who wore it with faith. Padre Pio often told his spiritual children to wear it daily, not out of habit, but as a conscious act of entrustment to the Mother of God. He also encouraged them to place miraculous medals within the home, especially near beds and in children's rooms, invoking Our Lady's tender guardianship over the most vulnerable. Padre Pio taught that when sacred medals were combined with the daily use of holy water, regular prayer before the crucifix, and the faithful praying of the rosary, they formed a spiritual perimeter around the home. This perimeter didn't just keep evil out, it attracted divine grace in. Each sacramental reinforced the others, creating not just a barrier, but a living atmosphere filled with the presence of God. But Padre Pio was clear, none of this worked if the family itself ignored the deeper call to holiness. Sacramentals are not substitutes for the sacraments. They are not replacements for confession, the Eucharist, or daily prayer. They are amplifiers, not origins. The real power comes from living a life that invites grace to flow freely. This was the foundation Padre Pio laid for every Catholic home under his care. A home where holy water flows, where crucifixes are honored, where the rosary is prayed aloud, and where sacred medals mark every entrance. That is a home covered by grace, guarded by angels, and nearly impenetrable to darkness. The power of sacramentals, as Padre Pio taught, was never meant to stand alone. Each piece, holy water, crucifix, rosary, sacred medals, was powerful, but together they formed something even greater. He called it the invisible shield, not a theory, not a metaphor. To Padre Pio, it was real, a spiritual force field woven around a home, layer by layer, each sacramental reinforcing the next. But this shield only existed when these objects were properly blessed, correctly placed, and consistently used with faith. That's where most families falter. They might have the objects, but they lack the understanding. They think owning a crucifix is enough. They assume placing a rosary on the nightstand guarantees protection. Padre Pio warned against this false security. Sacramentals without faith, intention and understanding were like armor left unworn. The enemy could walk right through them. That's why he gave clear instructions for how to establish what he called the rhythm of grace inside the home. It was more than just placing objects. It was about building habits, rituals that invited divine presence every single day, because grace flows where it is welcomed, and the invisible shield strengthens where faith is actively lived. Padre Pio taught his spiritual children that each day needed to begin with a conscious act of consecration. The moment your feet touched the floor, you were to stand before the main crucifix in your home, bless yourself with holy water, and make the sign of the cross slowly, with intention. This simple morning ritual was what he called the morning seal, a spiritual activation that set the tone for the entire day. He taught that doorways were spiritually significant. Every threshold represented a transition between the protected space of your home and the outside world where spiritual influences, both good and bad, constantly move. That's why he told families to place blessed crucifixes or St. Benedict medals at every entrance, and to pause for a moment of prayer whenever crossing those thresholds. Before meals, he instructed families to gather, not just to say grace, but to briefly acknowledge the presence of Christ in their home. Even a simple sign of the cross made together with intention strengthened the shield. It wasn't about lengthy prayers. It was about awareness, constant, consistent awareness that this home belonged to God. But it was the evening ritual that Padre Pio considered most critical. Night, he said, was when spiritual attacks most often intensified. It was the hour when fears crept in, when anxieties whispered, when darkness moved more freely. Before anyone went to sleep, the head of the household, or anyone with faith strong enough to lead, was to walk through the home with holy water, room by room, corner by corner, blessing each space while praying aloud. Padre Pio often recommended this prayer: "By this holy water and by your precious blood, O Lord, cleanse this home, seal it against all evil, and fill it with your peace." This was not a suggestion. It was a shield being reinforced every single night. And after blessing the home, each family member was to be blessed personally, forehead, hands, and heart, before they lay down to sleep. The bedrooms, Padre Pio taught, were where spiritual battles were most personal. Nightmares, night terrors, oppressive heaviness, all of these were signs that the shield needed reinforcement. That's why every bedroom was to contain both a crucifix and a rosary, visible and accessible, and not just for decoration. When fear struck, Padre Pio instructed his children to physically hold the crucifix or rosary, to pray aloud, to reclaim the space. Darkness cannot coexist where faith is actively declared. But what about those nights when fear or tension is so thick it feels impossible to pray? Padre Pio prepared for that too. He gave what he called the emergency ritual. In times of sudden spiritual disturbance, an overwhelming sense of dread, an unexplained argument erupting, a child waking up screaming, the family was to immediately gather before the main crucifix. There, holding holy water, the rosary, and a sacred medal, they were to pray together aloud, asking for divine intervention. This combination, sacramentals in hand, faith spoken aloud, united prayer, created what Padre Pio called the fortress moment, a surge of grace strong enough to drive out any immediate spiritual intrusion. But none of this was meant to work in isolation. Padre Pio warned repeatedly that sacramentals are not magical barriers. They are channels of grace, but that grace flows most powerfully when the family itself is actively pursuing holiness. A home covered in crucifixes, but filled with resentment, gossip, or bitterness, was spiritually weakened from within. The shield was only as strong as the love, forgiveness, and prayer life within the walls. That's why Padre Pio emphasized the family altar. It didn't have to be elaborate. A small table, a crucifix, a candle, perhaps an image of the Sacred Heart. This altar became the spiritual center of the home, a place where daily prayers, blessings, and rosaries were offered. When families prayed together at the altar, Padre Pio taught that grace flowed from heaven directly into the heart of the home, spreading outward through every room. He compared it to a hearth in the center of an old house. When the fire was lit, the whole home was warmed. When prayer was constant at the altar, the whole home was filled with grace. And it was at this altar that Padre Pio instructed families to renew their consecration to the Sacred Heart and to Our Lady regularly. These acts of consecration were not just symbolic. They were legal declarations in the spiritual realm. This home belongs to Christ. This family is under heaven's authority, and no darkness has legal access here. Padre Pio's teachings were never about fear. They were about authority. He didn't want families living in paranoia, constantly afraid of evil. He wanted them to understand their power, the power to claim their homes as sacred ground, to drive out darkness by the very presence of their faith lived out through these ancient, time-tested practices. The invisible shield was real, but it was never passive. It was built day by day, prayer by prayer, act of faith by act of faith. It was strengthened every time a father blessed his children with holy water, every time a mother prayed the rosary while walking the halls, every time a child fell asleep clutching a crucifix after a nightmare. This was spiritual life lived actively, consciously, deliberately, and it was this life that transformed ordinary homes into sanctuaries. And for Padre Pio, that was always the goal. Your home was never meant to be just shelter from physical storms. It was meant to be a dwelling place for God's presence, a beacon of light to anyone who entered, and a fortress that could withstand any darkness. This is what sacramentals were always meant to create, not decorations, but declarations. Padre Pio often reminded his spiritual children that every sacramental, no matter how powerful, only reaches its full potential when combined with something deeper, the living faith of the family who uses it. This was the core teaching so many overlook. Sacramentals are not walls that automatically block evil. They are conduits. What flows through them depends on the state of the soul that holds them. This is why Padre Pio constantly urged families to not only use sacramentals, but to actively cultivate a life of grace within the home. Without a life centered in prayer, forgiveness, and love, even the most blessed objects lose their strength. The invisible shield weakens from the inside out. He spoke often about the spiritual atmosphere of a home, the unseen climate created by words spoken, prayers offered, even thoughts entertained within its walls. Homes where gossip, anger, resentment, or impurity were allowed to flourish became spiritually porous. Grace could not flow freely where the air was thick with spiritual toxins. This is why Padre Pio taught that the first and most important act of spiritual protection wasn't just placing a crucifix on the wall. It was cleansing the spiritual air through daily prayer and forgiveness. He instructed families to begin each evening blessing not only by sprinkling holy water, but by forgiving each other aloud before they slept. He warned that even small grudges between family members could create cracks in the shield, allowing darkness to take hold. A home where forgiveness was daily practiced became a home nearly impossible for evil to enter. He also emphasized that every blessing was more powerful when combined with spoken declarations of faith. When a father blessed his children, Padre Pio taught him to say aloud, "I bless you in the name of Jesus Christ, under the protection of his cross and the prayers of Our Lady." Words, he said, carried power, not because of human eloquence, but because they declared spiritual authority into the physical world. This is why he urged families to speak blessings over doorways, over beds, over each other, declaring the home as sacred ground, sealed under divine authority. Silence, he warned, was spiritual passivity. Families that only prayed in silence left spiritual ground unclaimed. But homes where faith was spoken aloud, blessings declared, prayers said together, those homes became fortresses. Padre Pio also taught his children to watch for signs of spiritual breaches, subtle shifts in the atmosphere that revealed cracks in the shield, unexplained arguments that escalated quickly, a sudden wave of heaviness or tension in the air, recurring nightmares, or a sense of fear that seemed to hover for no reason. These were not coincidences. They were warnings. In moments like this, Padre Pio instructed families to immediately gather before the main crucifix. Holding the rosary and holy water, they were to pray aloud, declaring once again the home's consecration to Christ. This wasn't just a prayer of comfort. It was a legal act of spiritual authority, reclaiming the home for God. By doing this quickly and consistently, families could stop spiritual intrusion before it took root. But even deeper than these practical steps, Padre Pio taught something most profound. The greatest protection a home could have was the presence of God dwelling within its walls. This presence was cultivated not just through objects or rituals, but through daily surrender, offering every joy, every sorrow, every moment to God as a gift. The more a home lived this way, the more sacramentals came alive within it. This is why Padre Pio urged families to make their homes extensions of the altar. Every meal became an offering. Every act of forgiveness became a prayer. Every moment of service to each other became a hidden sacrifice. When homes were lived this way, sacramentals stopped being just objects. They became physical expressions of a spiritual reality already alive in the family. This is also why Padre Pio emphasized regular confession and receiving the Eucharist. Sacramentals were powerful, but they could not replace the sacraments themselves. The sacraments were the source of grace. Sacramentals were the conduits. Homes where confession was avoided, where the Eucharist was rarely received, became spiritually dry, like trying to pour water through a cracked pipe. He taught that before any major spiritual house blessing, the family should go to confession and receive the Eucharist together. This was not a formality. It was a way of sealing the family's hearts in grace, ensuring that what flowed through their sacramentals came from a clean source. And when families fell, because every family does, Padre Pio's message was clear: begin again immediately. He warned against the lie that spiritual failure disqualifies you from protection. On the contrary, families who admitted their weakness and returned to prayer quickly often built the strongest shields, because humility and repentance invite grace faster than pride ever could. He also gave a practical warning about blessed objects brought into the home without discernment. Not every religious object carries grace. Padre Pio taught that objects purchased from untrustworthy sources or taken from places of spiritual compromise could carry attachments, spiritual residue that needed cleansing before being placed in the home. He recommended always having new sacramentals properly blessed by a trusted priest and praying over them yourself before placing them in sacred spaces. Above all, Padre Pio taught that homes were not just shelters. They were domestic churches. What happened inside a home mattered spiritually to everyone who lived there. When families prayed together, blessed each other, forgave quickly, and spoke faith aloud, their homes became beacons of light, not just for themselves, but for the entire neighborhood. Grace overflowed from spiritually strong homes, touching neighbors without them even knowing why. This is why Padre Pio always ended his teachings on sacramentals with one final challenge. The shield you build over your home is not just for you, it is meant to be shared. When you teach another family how to build their shield, your own shield strengthens. Grace multiplies when it is given away. You've now heard what many Catholics were never taught. You've seen the blueprint for turning your home into a fortress of grace. The question is, what will you do with it? If you're ready to claim this truth for your family, declare it now. Comment below. My home belongs to God, and I choose to protect it. When you declare it publicly, you seal this teaching within your heart, and you become part of the spiritual chain spreading light one home at a time. Padre Pio often said that the strength of sacramentals doesn't begin with the object itself, but with the hands that hold it and the heart that prays with it. A crucifix, a rosary, a medal. They have no power in themselves if the soul holding them has closed itself off to grace. But when those same objects rest in the hands of someone walking in faith, they become conduits of unimaginable spiritual power. The reason is simple. Sacramentals do not generate grace, they channel it. And grace flows wherever it is truly invited. This is why Padre Pio placed such emphasis on the state of the soul. He taught that a home filled with sacramentals but lacking prayer, forgiveness, and charity was like a fortress built from paper, visibly impressive but easily breached. True protection came not just from the objects themselves, but from the faith that activated them. And that faith wasn't meant to be a fleeting emotion. It was meant to become the very atmosphere the family breathed. He often spoke about the spiritual climate of a home. Every conversation, every action, every thought contributed to this atmosphere. Homes where gossip, sarcasm, bitterness, and impatience were common became homes where grace struggled to flow. It wasn't because God withdrew his protection. It was because the family itself built walls that blocked grace from moving freely. This is why Padre Pio urged families to treat their homes as living altars, not just places to sleep and eat, but places where every action became an offering. When a mother folded laundry, she could offer that small act as a prayer. When a father blessed his children before bed, that blessing could become a declaration that sealed them under divine protection. When siblings forgave each other after a fight, that forgiveness became a prayer in motion. In homes like this, sacramentals didn't just decorate the walls, they radiated grace because the objects themselves were immersed in the family's daily life of faith. Padre Pio warned against compartmentalized spirituality, where faith was something practiced only at church or in moments of crisis. He knew that kind of faith left homes wide open to spiritual erosion. True protection came when every ordinary moment was infused with faith, when grace was invited into everything, from meals to conversations to moments of silence. In homes like this, even the smallest sacramental, an unnoticed medal tucked in a drawer, could radiate protection, because the home itself had become a vessel of grace. But Padre Pio also understood something most overlook. Grace doesn't flow equally in every home. There are homes where grace flows freely and homes where grace struggles to enter. The difference is not in the architecture, but in the spiritual authority established within the walls. This authority doesn't come from wealth, education, or even religious knowledge. It comes from surrender. The homes where grace flows most freely, Padre Pio taught, are the homes where families have surrendered control to God, not just once, but daily. These families don't just pray when trouble comes. They live in constant conversation with heaven. They don't just place a crucifix on the wall. They orient their entire family life around the cross. They don't just keep holy water by the door. They use it regularly to sanctify every ordinary moment. This daily surrender creates what Padre Pio called spiritual permeability, a condition where grace can move in and through the home without obstruction. This permeability is why some homes feel peaceful the moment you walk inside. It's not the decor, the cleanliness, or the absence of conflict. It's the atmosphere created by thousands of hidden prayers, silent offerings, quiet moments of surrender. In homes like this, sacramentals become extensions of the family's spiritual life, vessels constantly refilled by the grace flowing through every action, every word, every thought. Padre Pio also warned about the counterfeit peace many families settle for. This is the kind of peace that comes not from grace, but from avoidance. Families stop arguing not because they've forgiven, but because they've stopped communicating altogether. They avoid conflict by avoiding each other. They pursue comfort instead of conversion. And they convince themselves that this absence of visible conflict is the same thing as spiritual peace. But Padre Pio saw through this illusion. True peace, he taught, isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of grace even in the middle of tension. Homes filled with grace still experience arguments, disappointments, and difficulties. But those moments don't fracture the shield, because they are immediately surrendered into the hands of God. Conflict becomes a path to deeper understanding. Suffering becomes a shared offering, and fear becomes a doorway to trust. This is why Padre Pio instructed families to establish a rhythm of reconciliation, a habit of addressing conflicts quickly, forgiving regularly, and praying together after every moment of tension. This rhythm didn't just heal relationships, it reinforced the invisible shield protecting the home. He taught that unforgiveness was spiritual rust, corroding the shield from within. A family that refused to forgive each other made itself vulnerable, no matter how many crucifixes hung on the walls. He also gave families a powerful practice for reclaiming spiritual authority after conflict or spiritual dryness had weakened the shield. It was a form of spiritual reset, a simple but profound act of reconsecrating the home. Standing before the main crucifix, holding holy water and the rosary, The family would pray aloud, together. We reclaim this home for Jesus Christ. We consecrate every room, every doorway, every bed, every heart to his sacred heart and to the immaculate heart of Mary. Let every shadow flee from this place. Let every blessing flow into this home. We seal this home under the authority of heaven, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. This wasn't just prayer, it was spiritual legislation. It established in the unseen realm the legal ownership of the home. Padre Pio understood that spiritual authority works much like earthly authority. Ownership must be declared and documented. The more often a family did this, the clearer that ownership became in the spiritual realm. Padre Pio taught that the most protected homes were not necessarily the wealthiest, the most religiously educated, or even the most outwardly pious. The most protected homes were the ones where faith had soaked into every detail of daily life, where sacramentals were not decorations, but tools constantly used, where prayers were not formalities, but conversations with a God who was treated as a living presence in the home, where forgiveness flowed like water, and where surrender was not a one-time act, but a daily choice. In homes like this, the invisible shield was not fragile or temporary. It was a living presence, strengthened daily, constantly replenished. Sacramentals did not replace this faith. They magnified it. They turned ordinary homes into domestic churches, where grace lived not only in the objects, but in the air itself. This was Padre Pio's vision for every Catholic home, not a museum of religious objects, but a living sanctuary, where every word, every action, and every breath was infused with grace. This is the kind of home that becomes nearly impenetrable to darkness. And this is the home every family is called to build. Padre Pio's vision for every Catholic home was clear. Your house was never meant to be just a physical shelter. It was meant to be a spiritual stronghold, a sanctuary where heaven touched earth, a place where grace didn't just visit, but lived. Every sacramental you own, every drop of holy water, every crucifix, every medal, every rosary is part of building that sanctuary. But no object works in isolation. Each one draws power from something deeper, the living faith that flows through your family's daily life. This is why Padre Pio didn't just teach families to collect sacramentals. He taught them to weave sacramentals into their rhythm of life, so that these sacred objects were never passive decorations, but active instruments of grace. A crucifix that is prayed before daily, a rosary that is prayed together, holy water that touches every door, medals that mark every entrance. These are not superstitious gestures. They are spiritual declarations, legal claims made in the unseen realm that this home belongs to God. But there was one final piece of Padre Pio's teaching that most families overlook. He called it the daily renewal of the shield. Just as physical armor must be maintained and inspected, so too must the invisible shield. Every morning and every evening, the family is to renew their spiritual protection, not because grace is weak, but because life is full of friction. Every word spoken, every emotion felt, every action taken either strengthens or weakens the shield. Renewal is not about fear, it's about responsibility. This is why Padre Pio taught his spiritual children a simple but powerful nightly blessing. Before the family slept, the head of the household, or anyone with strong faith, was to bless each family member with holy water, making the sign of the cross on their forehead, and praying aloud, "May the cross of Christ guard your mind. May the precious blood cover your heart. May the prayers of Our Lady watch over your soul. Sleep in the peace of Christ." It wasn't just a prayer for rest. It was a reaffirmation of spiritual authority, declaring once again who ruled that home. Padre Pio knew that spiritual attacks often came at night, not because darkness was stronger then, but because hearts were more vulnerable. When the family slept under a renewed blessing, the invisible shield held strong through every hour of the night. But there's more. Padre Pio also taught that the shield is strengthened every time grace is given away. Homes that hoard blessings lose strength. Homes that share blessings multiply protection. This is why he constantly urged families to not only protect their own homes, but to teach others how to do the same. Every time you help another family build their invisible shield, you strengthen your own. Grace flows where it is invited, and it overflows where it is given. He called this the spiritual chain, a living network of homes covered by grace, linked through prayer, sacramentals, and shared knowledge. Every home that joined the chain strengthened the whole. Every time one family renewed their shield, the grace rippled outward to touch others in the chain. This is how ordinary homes became extraordinary beacons of light. And here's something Padre Pio emphasized with urgency. The enemy fears consecrated homes. Not just homes with crucifixes and medals, but homes where families live what they believe. Homes where forgiveness flows faster than resentment. Homes where prayer is natural, not forced. Homes where faith is spoken aloud. These are the homes darkness avoids, not because of the objects themselves, but because of the living faith they represent. This is why Padre Pio warned against spiritual passivity. A home can start strong but weaken if the family grows complacent. He saw it too often. A family begins with devotion, but as life gets busy, prayers become rushed, sacramentals are forgotten, and the shield weakens. It doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual, a slow erosion of grace through neglect, and the enemy is patient. He waits for the cracks to widen. This is why Padre Pio insisted that spiritual protection is a lifestyle, not a checklist. There's no formula you can complete once and forget. The shield must be built and rebuilt every day, through every word, every prayer, every action. When families understand this, sacramentals stop being religious accessories. They become extensions of their very breath. But Padre Pio also gave hope. For families who feel they've already let the shield weaken, for homes where conflict has already taken root, he offered the grace of restoration. Any home, no matter how broken, can be reclaimed. Any shield, no matter how cracked, can be rebuilt. The first step is always the same: repentance and renewal. The family must gather, no matter how awkward, no matter how divided, and stand before the main crucifix. Holding holy water, the rosary, and a blessed medal, they are to pray aloud together. We reclaim this home for Jesus Christ. We repent for every word, every action, every sin that weakened this shield. We consecrate this home anew to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Let every shadow flee. Let every blessing flow. Let this home become a sanctuary of grace, sealed by the authority of heaven. This simple act, when done with sincerity, immediately begins the process of spiritual restoration. The shield is not rebuilt instantly, but the flow of grace is unblocked, and every act of faith from that moment forward strengthens what was once broken. This is the legacy Padre Pio left to every Catholic family. He didn't leave behind wealth or property. He left behind a spiritual blueprint, tested through his own suffering, forged in the fires of relentless spiritual battle. It was not theory for him. It was survival. And now, it is inheritance, a gift passed to every home willing to claim it. The question now is, will you claim it? If this message has stirred something in your heart, if you felt that quiet confirmation that this was the missing piece you've been searching for, then act on it now. Don't just nod and move on. Make it real. Declare it. Type in the comments, "My home is covered by grace." When you do, you're not just interacting with a video, you're making a public declaration to heaven itself. Like this video to anchor this truth in your heart. Subscribe so you never miss another revelation that could shield your family. Share this message with someone you love, because your light might be the very spark their home is waiting for. Together we rebuild the ancient walls. Together we restore the invisible shield. Together we create a chain of grace that no darkness can break.